What's up, Space Monkeys? Welcome to Political Fight Club. I'm Robert Durden. I'm going to read Dreamland again today. Page 132. This is chapter 25. It's called Swing with OxyContin. In 1997, in the town of Chillicothe in southern Ohio, Philip Pryor, a family physician at a local hospital, began to notice salesmen from a company called Purdue Pharma making regular appearances. The salesmen would arrive every few months to provide docs an elaborate lunch of steak, salad, and dessert. They had slides and graphics that presented the startling idea that the company's new drug, OxyContin, was virtually non-addictive. Less than 1% of patients ever grew addicted, they said in their presentations. This claim startled Pryor because OxyContin contained huge doses of the opiate called oxycodone. Pryor had attended medical school in the early 80s where he had learned opiates were generally to be avoided. He'd remembered a study that concluded the daily usage of 30 milligrams of oxycodone was enough to cause withdrawal. The Purdue sales campaign contradicted, quote, what we had learned in medical school. I was trained that they were dangerous addictive drugs and only effective for a short period of time, Pryor said. We were very hesitant to use narcotics because they're dangerous. It flew so much in the face of what we were trained about narcotics being a last-ditch effort for dying cancer patients and not to be used for non-malignant pain. It is interesting how capitalists usually will tell you something through the mainstream media about medicine that contradicts so many people who actually have medical training, like this, or like, natural immunity isn't a thing. Stuff like that, just interesting. I see a pattern. But the salesman had charts and graphs supporting the idea that because OxyContin was a timed-release medication, that patients felt fewer of the strong highs and deep lows that led to addiction. Thus, the salesman insisted it could be prescribed to people with chronic pain in their backs, knees, or other joints, chronic pelvic pain or fibromyalgia, or to women after giving birth. It was a very effective presentation, Pryor said. It really did make you doubt your feelings about what you've been taught in medical school. They came through often, 6 times in 1997 to his hospital alone, Pryor remembered, and held hundreds of meetings in the southern Ohio area, all with the same message. The OxyContin sales campaign mounted by Purdue Pharma was legend, and manifest in it was the spirit of Arthur Sackler and his focus on direct contact with physicians. Purdue had its salespeople dig on doctors who its data showed were already heavy opiate prescribers. To expand the numbers of prescribers, sales reps also visited nurses, pharmacists, hospices, hospitals, and nursing homes. The physician call list used by Purdue's sales reps began at 33,000, then rose to more than 70,000 doctors nationwide. Purdue's sales force tripled to more than 1,000 as OxyContin gained momentum. During these years, the company was hardly alone in this. The decade of the 90s was the era of the blockbuster drug, the billion-dollar pill, and a pharmaceutical sales force arms race was part of the excess of this time. The industry's business model was based on creating a pill for cholesterol, depression, pain, or impotence, and then promoting it with growing numbers of salespeople. During the 1990s and into the next decade, Arthur Sackler's vision of pharmaceutical promotion reached its most exquisite expression as drug companies hired ever larger sales teams. In 1995, 35,000 Americans were pharmaceutical sales reps. 10 years later, a record 110,000 people, Sackler's progeny all, were traveling the country selling legal drugs in America. And nowadays, every other ad you see on television is Big Pharma just pumping out a new drug and then convincing people that they need to tell their doctors that they need this thing. That's why pharmaceutical ads you see on television in America, they're only legal in one other country, New Zealand. They're illegal in all the other countries because of this exact stuff. Anyway, I digress. They crowded into doctors' offices and hospital corridors. Pfizer, that tiny chemical concern that had... Pfizer. Have you heard that name lately? Pfizer, that tiny chemical concern that had hired Sackler a half-century before, was now the world's largest drug company, with blockbuster drugs like Viagra, the antidepressant Zoloft, and the best-selling drug ever, Lipitor, an anti-cholesterol drug, and now mRNA vaccines as well. They made like $50 billion off of that last year. Pfizer was at the forefront of putting Sackler's ideas into practice. Its sales force grew to 38,000 people worldwide, 12,000 in the U.S. alone. Doctors complained they were getting visits by 3 Pfizer reps a day. There's way more commercials than that nowadays, but at the time this probably seemed pretty annoying. 3 Pfizer reps a day. The industry called it feet on the street, with mobs of salesmen calling on doctors to get them to change how they prescribed. But Pfizer was only the leader in an industry obsessed with blockbuster drugs and convinced that more salespeople was the way to get doctors' attention in a crowded market. A pharmaceutical Wild West emerged. Salespeople stampeded into offices. They made claims that helped sell the drugs to besieged doctors. Those claims also led years later to blockbuster lawsuits and criminal cases against their companies. Purdue increased the sales quota of OxyContin needed to make bonuses. Even so, salespeople surpassed every goal. In 1996, Purdue paid $1 million in bonuses tied to Oxy sales and $40 million in bonuses 5 years later. Some Purdue reps, particularly in southern Ohio, eastern Kentucky, and other areas first afflicted with rampant oxy addiction, were reported to have made as much as $100,000 in bonuses in 1 quarter during these years. Those were unlike any bonuses ever paid to the U.S. pharmaceutical industry. Veteran drug salespeople say that in most drug companies, a bonus for a stellar year is about $30,000. Companies can predict how well its drugs can sell and raise goals on drugs doing well to avoid paying such whopping bonuses. So Purdue was apparently underestimating the amount these folks could sell every year and/or the drug, combined with the pain revolution and the idea that it was essentially non-addictive. It was virtually selling itself. Whatever the case, the bonuses to Purdue salespeople in these regions had little relation to those paid at most U.S. drug companies. They bore instead a striking similarity to the kinds of profits made in the drug underworld. It was a good time to be a Purdue salesman. In 2002, the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, a pharmaceutical trade group, and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services put out voluntary guidelines on marketing opiate painkillers, attempting to restrain the massive pharma sales force. They admonished companies from offering inappropriate travel, meals, and gifts to get doctors to prescribe certain drugs, and from paying excessive consulting and research fees to doctors. The guidelines prohibited giving away merchandise not related to healthcare. But that was in 2002. For Oxy's first 6 years, Purdue was not limited by much. Purdue offered OxyContin coupons to physicians who could in turn give them to patients for a one-time free prescription at participating pharmacy. If there's something more American than that, I haven't heard about it. A coupon for 1 free dose of OxyContin. By the time Purdue discontinued the program, 34,000 coupons had been redeemed. Doctors received OxyContin fishing hats, stuffed toys, coffee mugs, golf balls, and pens with a chart converting a patient's dose in other pills to OxyContin. Swing is Alive, a CD the company gave out, urged listeners to, quote, swing in the right direction with OxyContin, and featured 10 big band tunes, including Count Basie's 1 O'Clock Jump and Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy by the Andrews Sisters. Pads of message paper with the OxyContin logo were given to doctors so they would be, quote, reminded of OxyContin every time they got a phone message. Many of these methods, premiums, trips, giveaways, were time-tested strategies that grew from the revolution Arthur Sackler began and were refined over time by many pharmaceutical companies. Only this time, the pill being marketed to contain a large whack of drug virtually identical to heroin. The DEA later said that no company had ever used this kind of branded merchandise to market a so-called Schedule II drug. Schedule II is a federal designation for drugs with accepted medical uses, but a high potential for abuse, resulting in dependency. Purdue held some 40 pain management and speaker training seminars. The company recruited physicians for its National Speakers Bureau to talk about the use of OxyContin, and by implication OxyContin, to doctors and nurses at medical conferences and hospitals. These conferences took place in Boca Raton, Florida, and Scottsdale, Arizona, and some 5,000 physicians, pharmacists, and nurses attended in the 5 years the seminars were offered. Purdue also made continuing medical education, CME, an important part of its campaign. By the 90s, CME had been around for a decade, but had grown largely dependent on drug company funding. The company shelled out hundreds of millions of dollars, usually from their marketing budgets, to fly medical practitioners to resorts. There, the companies plied them with dinners, golf outings, and spa treatments while sending them to seminars on a medical issue, led by specialists that the companies often suggested. Often the conclusion was that a drug the companies made was a solution to a medical problem. Hardworking doctors, furthermore, weren't eager to go to unappealing places, but they flocked to resorts like Scottsdale for their CME, expecting to be catered to by wealthy drug companies. Significant education, of course, usually did take place. Most medical professionals wouldn't have sat through the simple hawking of drugs, but the conflicts of interest were palpable. During those years, quote, CME was often a clandestine marketing tool for drug companies, said one seminar organizer who remains in the business. Golf, dinner, wine and dine doctors, and you will win these guys' hearts and minds, or at least some of them. In 2004, the Accreditation Council for Continuing Medical Education wrote new rules aimed to brighten the line between pharmaceutical companies and the seminars. The rules now prohibit pharma company influence on content and speaker selection, as well as limitations on how grant funding can be used. Drug company funding for the seminars has since dropped off, and several of the major medical education companies left the business. Now a lot of CME is online, where the risk of improper influence through resorts, dinners, and golf outings is removed. But prior to that, Purdue sponsored CME seminars, particularly on new techniques for pain treatment, which often urged the use of unnamed time-release opiates. Not coincidentally, OxyContin was the only such pill on the market. The U.S. General Accounting Office reported that the company helped fund more than 20,000 education programs. These often included ways for physicians to get CME credits at state and local medical conferences. Russell Portnoy was a frequent Purdue speaker and an eloquent one. He stressed the complexity of pain treatment. Pain sometimes required a multidisciplinary approach, he said. But he also insisted that chronic pain was frequently best treated with long-acting opiate painkillers. It wasn't like Portnoy came up with these concepts to benefit Purdue. He sincerely believed that these were miracle drugs for chronic pain, said the CME seminar organizer who worked with the doctor and the company. But had Portnoy not had Purdue's money behind him, he would have published some papers, made some speeches, and his influence would have been minor. But with Purdue's millions behind him, his message, which dovetailed with their marketing plans, was hugely magnified. He was a godsend for Purdue. All you need is one guy to say what he was saying. The other guys who are sounding a warning about these drugs don't get funded. They get a journal article, not a megaphone. Video was another medium Purdue used to apparently great effect. In 1998, Purdue sent out 15,000 copies of a video about OxyContin to doctors around the country without submitting it to the FDA for review, contrary to the agency's regulations. I got my life back. Patients in pain tell their story, told of the pain relief enjoyed by several patients. 2 years later, Purdue sent out another 12,000 copies of an updated version of I Got My Life Back, showing patients talking about how OxyContin had changed their lives. It included information on the 160 milligram version of the pill and made, quote, unsubstantiated claims regarding OxyContin's effect on patients' quality of life and minimized the risks associated with the drug, according to the GAO's 2003 report on the company's OxyContin promo campaign. A doctor in the video again made the claim, erroneously lifted from Porter and Jick, that narcotic painkillers were shown to cause addiction in less than 1% of patients. In addition, the company set out 14,000 copies of a video intended for doctors' offices' waiting rooms. From one pain patient to another, advice from patients who have found relief. Encouraging patients to report their pain to physicians and aiming to relieve concerns about taking opiate painkillers, claiming again that the pills caused addiction in less than 1% of patients. Purdue funded pain societies and websites promoting pain treatment. These organizations appeared to be informational, but were funded by pharmaceutical companies. Partners Against Pain was founded in 1997 to offer consumers information about pain treatment options, including Oxy, and providing a list of doctors around the United States who treated pain. One Purdue-funded website, FamilyPractice.com, offered doctors listings of free continuing medical education programs on pain management. Free continuing education for pain management. The American Pain Foundation, a Baltimore organization that promoted the use of opiates for both acute and chronic pain, was funded by Purdue. The foundation organized email campaigns to media outlets it accused of biased reporting on opiates and pain treatment. ProPublica, an investigative journalism nonprofit, reported that the foundation sided with Purdue in a 2001 class action case brought by Ohio patients who claimed to have become addicted to or depended upon OxyContin. The APF would disband in 2012 as the U.S. Senate committee announced it was investigating the group's role in promoting the use of opiate painkillers. Purdue donated money for website development to established groups such as American Chronic Pain Association and the American Academy of Pain Medicine. The company was widely criticized for its campaign. Eventually, it would be prosecuted criminally, yet Purdue's marketing couldn't have found an audience without the pain crusaders who tenderized the terrain for years before that, convincing primary care doctors that in this new age of opiates, they could be prescribed to pain patients with virtually no risk of addiction. In many cases, hospital lawyers advised doctors that patients could sue them for not adequately treating their pain if they didn't prescribe these drugs. Had that not happened, had there been no insistence that pain was undertreated and that pain was now a fifth vital sign, OxyContin would likely not have found the market that it did. By 2003, more than half the prescribers of OxyContin nationwide were primary care doctors who had little pain management training and were under pressure to get patients in and out of the offices. Oxy prescriptions for chronic pain rose from 670,000 in 97 to 6.2 million in 2002. So that's 10 times as much. Those for cancer pain rose from 250,000 to just over 1 million over that same time. Again, 4 times as much. Phil Pryor soon noticed colleagues prescribing OxyContin for chronic ailments, back and knee pain, for example, or fibromyalgia that the salesman had mentioned. In southern Ohio, few people had ever come to drug treatments strung out on opiates, but by 1998, however, Chillicothe and the surrounding towns were awash in hundreds of patients addicted to OxyContin. Indeed, patients would go to a doctor after a doctor with stories of pain and requests for more of the new drug. Dealers who sold meth or cocaine on the street started pushing Oxy. Addicts learned to crush it and snort it or inject it, obtaining all 12 hours worth of oxycodone at once. Seniors realized they could subsidize their retirement by selling their prescription Oxy to younger folks. Some of the first Oxy dealers, in fact, were seniors who saw the value of the pills in their cabinets. "It's like hitting the lotto if your doctor will put you on OxyContin," Pryor said. "People don't even think twice about selling." OxyContin sales shot up. They surpassed Purdue's goals every year until they exceeded $1 billion in each of 2001 and 2002. Rampant abuse accompanied those sales figures. News reports coined the nickname hillbilly heroin and chronicled the devastation caused by addiction to OxyContin. How many addicts began as recreational users and how many had once been pain patients was never quite clear. Not far from Chillicothe, at West Virginia University in Morgantown, Dr. Carl Raleigh Sullivan watched his drug rehabilitation clinic fill with OxyContin addicts. Alcoholics had been the clinic's stock in trade, but West Virginia towns now teemed with opiate addicts. to the point where alcoholics couldn't find a bed at Sullivan's clinic. He was seeing people on spectacular doses of Oxy every day, 300 milligrams and more. He couldn't tell the difference between them and a heroin addict. Purdue and the pharmaceutical industry were saying that addiction in OxyContin was really rare, said Sullivan. The incidence of addiction was far higher than they indicated, but there was an enthusiasm for using opiates that was not borne out by science. As news reports recounted rising OxyContin abuse and addiction, Purdue called Sullivan and asked him to speak to its sales reps. 20 of them met Sullivan at a hotel in Charleston. He saw that they were concerned. He spent a couple of hours with them, describing the foot traffic at his clinic, the amounts of their drug that addicts, some of them former pain patients, were consuming. "We were told this was safe," said one sales rep. Sullivan brought along a woman from his clinic recovering from addiction to Oxy. One sales rep asked her how long she would need to score OxyContin on the street outside the hotel. "About 20 minutes, the woman replied, "but that's only because I don't drive." Sullivan thought the visit sobered the sales reps, who'd been charging hard into doctors' offices for 5 years by then, but he noticed that Purdue kept selling OxyContin the way it had. The pill now made up 90% of the company's annual revenue. 6 months later, the woman Sullivan brought into the meeting died of an OxyContin overdose. All right, we will continue on page 140, The Man at Home, with the next episode, guys. Keep fighting that good fight.